After losing their daughter, an elderly couple bought a storage unit and found a doll that spoke her name. The porcelain doll's lips moved, and Margaret Hensley's knees buckled as the whispered word escaped its painted mouth: Lily. Her husband Robert caught her elbow, his weathered hands trembling as violently as her own, because they both heard it, clear as church bells on Sunday morning, their daughter's name spoken by something that shouldn't speak at all. The doll sat propped against a water-stained cardboard box in the dim storage unit they'd purchased just 20 minutes ago for $300, its glass eyes reflecting the single bulb swaying overhead. And Margaret wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to wake up from whatever nightmare had followed them into this concrete tomb. But instead, she reached forward with shaking fingers, because grief makes you do impossible things. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, tell us where you're watching from. And to make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or life-changing discoveries, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Robert's grip tightened on her arm. Maggie, don't. But Margaret was already moving, drawn by a force she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. 3 months. 3 months since they'd buried Lily, their only child, their 32-year-old daughter who died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening. 3 months of waking up to silence, of cooking meals for 2 instead of 3, of avoiding the third bedroom that still smelled like her lavender perfume. The storage unit had been Margaret's idea, a distraction more than anything else. She'd read about it in some online forum for grieving parents, how the act of sorting through strangers' abandoned belongings could occupy your hands and mind, give you something to focus on besides the gaping hole in your chest. Robert had been skeptical, but had stopped arguing with her about most things lately. Grief had made them both compliant, too exhausted to fight about anything that didn't involve their daughter's memory. They'd gone to the auction that morning at Pinecrest Storage, a sprawling facility on the edge of town where Robert had once rented a unit to store his woodworking equipment. Unit 247 had been their winning bid, outbidding a young couple by $50. The auctioneer had given them 15 minutes to examine the contents from the doorway before the bidding started, standard procedure. And Margaret had seen only shadows and shapes, furniture draped in sheets, stacks of boxes, the silhouette of what might have been a bicycle. Nothing to suggest what waited inside. The doll was perhaps 2 feet tall, dressed in a faded blue pinafore with white lace trim. Its blonde hair hung in loose curls past its shoulders, slightly matted, as if it had been loved once, held tight by small hands. The kind of antique toy that belonged in a Victorian parlor or a collector's glass case, not abandoned in a storage unit in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Margaret knelt beside it, ignoring the protest in her arthritic knees. Up close, she could see the fine cracks in the porcelain face, the delicate painted eyelashes, the slight parting of the lips, as if frozen mid-breath. Her hand hovered inches from its shoulder. "You imagined it," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd heard it too. They both had. "Lily," Margaret whispered, testing the word, and the doll's head tilted. Just a fraction, barely perceptible, but enough to make Robert curse under his breath and step backward, his boot crunching on scattered debris. Margaret's hand connected with the doll's shoulder, and the world lurched. She wasn't in the storage unit anymore. She was standing in Lily's childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through curtains printed with dancing bears. Lily was 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on her bed, talking to a doll that looked exactly like the one Margaret now touched. But Lily was laughing, her face bright with joy, telling the doll secrets about a boy named Tommy who'd shared his juice box at lunch. "Maggie!" Robert's voice shattered the vision, and Margaret gasped, pulling her hand back. She was on her knees in the storage unit again, dust motes swirling in the weak light, her husband's face pale with fear. "I saw her," Margaret breathed. "I saw Lily, as a child. She had this doll. Robert, she had this exact doll. That's impossible. Lily never. But Robert stopped, his brow furrowing. Wait, there was a doll when she was little. I'd forgotten. Your mother gave it to her for Christmas. What was it called? Annabelle, Margaret said, the memory surfacing like a drowned body. She named it Annabelle. She carried it everywhere for months, talked to it like it was real. Then, one day, she just stopped, said it frightened her. We donated it to Goodwill when she was 8. They both stared at the doll. Annabelle. After 25 years, here it was, sitting in a storage unit they'd purchased by random chance, speaking their daughter's name. Robert crouched beside Margaret, his knees popping. This doesn't make sense. How would Lily's old doll end up here? We got rid of it decades ago. And dolls don't just talk. Some do, Margaret said. The mechanical ones. Pull-string dolls that say Mama or I love you. You think this is mechanical? Margaret reached for the doll again, more carefully this time, and lifted it. It was heavier than expected, solid. She turned it over, examining the back of its dress, feeling along the seams. Nothing. No pull string, no battery compartment, no mechanisms at all. Maybe it's voice-activated, Robert suggested. Some kind of recording device hidden inside. Could be someone's idea of a prank, buying up old dolls and rigging them with electronics. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind of logical assessment that had made Robert a successful accountant before his retirement. Margaret wanted to believe it, but something in her chest, the same intuition that had known, absolutely known, when the police officer appeared at their door 3 months ago, told her this was something else entirely. She set the doll down and surveyed the rest of the unit's contents. The space was perhaps 10 by 15 feet, packed with the detritus of someone's life. Against the back wall stood a wardrobe with a cracked mirror, flanked by 2 filing cabinets. Boxes were stacked in haphazard towers, some labeled in black marker. Kitchen, books, winter clothes. A rolled-up rug leaned in one corner next to a floor lamp with a stained shade. Everything wore a uniform coating of dust, suggesting the unit had been abandoned for years. "We should look around," Margaret said, pushing herself to her feet. "Find out who rented this unit. There might be documents, papers with a name." "The auction company would have that information," Robert pointed out. "They had to know who owned it before they could auction the contents. Then we ask them." Robert studied his wife's face, seeing the determination there, the first spark of purpose he'd witnessed since Lily's funeral. He should discourage this, whatever this was. The doll was a coincidence, an odd one certainly, but just a coincidence nonetheless. Their grief was making them see connections that didn't exist, patterns in randomness. But Margaret was standing straighter than she had in months. And if chasing this mystery, this impossibility, gave her a reason to get out of bed tomorrow, he'd chase it with her. "All right," he said, "let's see what we can find." They spent the next hour excavating the unit, working in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional observation. Margaret opened boxes while Robert tackled the larger furniture pieces. Most of the contents were unremarkable. Kitchen supplies, clothing that smelled of mothballs, paperback novels with cracked spines. The books were romance novels mostly, their covers featuring shirtless men and swooning women, suggesting a female owner. Robert discovered a box of photographs and brought it to where Margaret sat sorting through kitchen items. They spread the photos across the dusty floor, creating a mosaic of moments frozen in time. Most featured a young woman with dark hair and sharp cheekbones, photographed at various ages. As a teenager in a high school graduation gown, in her 20s, standing in front of a Christmas tree, in her 30s, laughing at some off-camera joke. "She's pretty," Margaret observed, or was. "These photos have to be 10, 15 years old at least." "Look at this one." Robert held up a picture of the woman standing in front of a house, a sold sign visible in the background. Her smile was wide, triumphant. Written on the back in fading ink, "My first home, October 2003. They found more personal items as they dug deeper. A jewelry box containing costume pieces and a single pearl necklace. A stack of greeting cards bound with a rubber band, birthday wishes from someone named Mom and Dad. A leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and yellowed. Margaret opened the journal carefully, conscious of its fragility. The handwriting inside was neat, precise, each letter perfectly formed. The first entry was dated January 1st, 2004. "New year, new home, new beginning," Margaret read aloud. "I know Mom thinks I'm crazy for buying a house on my own, but I need this. Need to prove I can take care of myself. The house needs work. The kitchen is straight out of 1975, but it's mine. Dr. Vance says independence is crucial for my recovery, and I'm finally starting to believe him." Recovery from what? Robert wondered. Margaret flipped through more pages, scanning the entries. The woman, whose name was revealed as Claire Dennison, wrote about her job as a librarian, her struggles with anxiety, her therapy sessions with Dr. Vance. The entries painted a picture of someone trying to rebuild herself after some unspecified trauma. Then, on a page dated March 15, 2004, Margaret found it. "I saw the doll again today, in the library on the children's shelf. I know it's not the same one. That one is locked away in storage, and it'll stay there until I die or lose this unit, whichever comes first. But this one looked so similar. Same blonde curls, same blue dress, same knowing eyes. A little girl was holding it, maybe 7 or 8 years old, talking to it like it could answer back. Her mother didn't notice. They never do, not until it's too late. I wanted to warn her, to rip the doll from her hands and tell her what I know. But what would I say? That dolls can steal pieces of your soul? That some toys are doors to places we're not meant to go? She'd think I was insane. Maybe I am. Maybe Dr. Vance is wrong, and I'll never really recover from what happened." Margaret's hand shook as she passed the journal to Robert. He read the entry, his frown deepening. "This is about the doll," he said, "about Annabelle. Claire Dennison owned it. But why? How did she get it after we donated it?" "Keep reading," Margaret urged. Robert flipped backward, searching for earlier mentions. He found one dated January 10, 2004. "Moved the last of the boxes into storage today. Unit 247 at Pinecrest. I kept thinking I should just throw it all away, the doll especially, but I can't. It's evidence, in a way. Proof that what happened to me was real, not just a psychotic break like the first doctors claimed. The doll stays locked away where it can't hurt anyone else. I wish I could destroy it, but every time I try, something stops me. Fear, maybe. Or the memory of Anna's voice coming from its lips, begging me not to." "Anna," Margaret whispered. "Who's Anna?" They searched through more of the unit, looking for any mention of this name. Margaret found it in a box labeled "Personal," tucked beneath a stack of old bills and tax documents. A newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile, from the Millbrook Gazette, dated September 23, 1998. "Local woman missing after mysterious circumstances." Claire Dennison, 24, was hospitalized last week following what police describe as a mental health episode. Dennison was found wandering Route 47 in a state of confusion, claiming her roommate, Anna Pruitt, 23, had gone into the doll. Pruitt has been missing since September 18th. Police have searched Dennison and Pruitt's shared apartment but found no evidence of foul play. Dennison remains hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Anyone with information about Anna Pruitt's whereabouts is urged to contact the Millbrook Police Department. Margaret felt the temperature in the storage unit drop, or maybe it was just her blood going cold. She showed Robert the clipping, watched his face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching fear. "This is—" Robert started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Insane," Margaret supplied. "This is insane. A woman goes missing, her roommate claims she went into a doll, And that doll ends up being the same one our daughter played with as a child? It can't be the same doll. That's impossible. But even as Robert said it, they both looked at Annabelle, still sitting where Margaret had placed her, those glass eyes reflecting the overhead light, that slight smile frozen on porcelain lips. Margaret stood and walked back to the doll. She picked it up, ignoring Robert's protest, and looked directly into its face. "Who are you?" she asked. "What are you?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, so soft Margaret almost missed it, a whisper that seemed to come from inside the doll's hollow body. "Help us." Margaret dropped the doll. It hit the concrete floor with a crack that made Robert wince, expecting it to shatter. But it didn't. It lay on its side, one arm bent at an unnatural angle, that painted smile now seeming mocking, cruel. "We're leaving," Robert said, grabbing Margaret's arm. "Right now. We'll lock this unit and never come back. Whatever this is, it's not our problem." "It spoke to me," Margaret said, her voice distant. "It asked for help." "Dolls don't speak. This is grief, Maggie. We're seeing what we want to see, hearing what we want to hear. Lily is gone, and no doll is going to bring her back." The words were harsh, harsher than Robert had intended, and he saw Margaret flinch as if slapped. But they needed to be said. This madness had to stop before it consumed them both. Margaret pulled her arm free from his grip. "I'm not trying to bring her back, but something is happening here, something connected to Lily. Why else would the doll say her name?" "It didn't. We imagined it because we saw a doll that looked like one Lily used to own." The human mind finds patterns, creates connections, especially when we're traumatized. "Then explain the journal. Explain Claire Dennison's story about Anna." "I can't," Robert admitted, "but that doesn't mean the explanation is supernatural. Maybe Dennison was genuinely disturbed, and her delusions centered around a doll. Maybe Anna Prewitt ran away from an unstable roommate and started a new life somewhere. Maybe this is all just coincidence." "You don't believe that." Robert wanted to believe it, desperately. He wanted to walk out of this storage unit, drive home, and forget any of this had happened. But Margaret was right. He'd heard the doll speak Lily's name. He'd felt the wrongness radiating from it the moment they'd entered this space. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. Margaret picked up the doll again, cradling it carefully. The crack in the floor had created a spiderweb fracture across the doll's left cheek, but otherwise it remained intact. "I want to find out what happened to Anna Prewitt," she said, "and I want to know why this doll has our daughter's name." Robert recognized that tone. It was the same one Margaret had used 33 years ago when she'd announced she was going back to school for her nursing degree, despite his concerns about the cost and her already busy schedule. Once Margaret set her mind to something, the universe had no choice but to rearrange itself to accommodate her will. "Fine," he sighed. "Where do we start?" "The newspaper. They might have archives, follow-up stories about the disappearance." They gathered what they deemed important: the journal, the newspaper clipping, a box of Claire Dennison's correspondence, and, despite Robert's protests, the doll itself. Margaret wrapped Annabelle in an old towel she found in one of the boxes, creating a makeshift shroud. Carrying it felt wrong, like transporting a bomb that might detonate at any moment, but Margaret refused to leave it behind. They locked the unit and returned to the auction office, where a bored teenager sat playing a game on his phone. He barely looked up when Robert asked about the previous owner of Unit 247. "Claire Dennison," the kid said, reading from a computer screen. "Unit went unpaid for 6 months. We tried contacting her, sent certified letters, made phone calls. Everything came back undeliverable. Finally declared abandonment and scheduled the auction. Standard procedure." "Do you have an address for her?" Margaret asked. The teenager squinted at the screen. 317 Maple Street, Apartment B. But like I said, mail came back, probably moved. Robert wrote down the address. "What about next of kin, emergency contact?" "Just says none. Look, is there a problem? You bought the unit fair and square. All sales are final. No problem, Margaret assured him. Just curious about the previous owner. They left the office and sat in their car, the wrapped doll resting in Margaret's lap like a grotesque infant. Robert started the engine but didn't put the car in gear. What now? He asked. 317 Maple Street. Maggie, the kid said she moved. Then we'll find out where she went. Someone on that street might remember her, might know what happened. Robert pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward downtown Millbrook. Maple Street was in the older section of town, where grand Victorian homes had been subdivided into apartments, and front yards had surrendered to parking spaces. Number 317 was a narrow three-story building, badly in need of paint, its front porch sagging under the weight of abandoned furniture and beer bottles. They parked on the street and approached the building. The directory by the front door listed 6 apartments, but apartment B showed no current tenant name. Margaret pressed the buzzer anyway. After a long moment, a crackling voice emerged from the intercom. Yeah? Hello. We're looking for Claire Dennison. We understand she used to live in apartment B. A pause. Who's asking? My name is Margaret Hensley. My husband and I bought a storage unit that belonged to Miss Dennison. We found some personal items we'd like to return to her. Another pause, longer this time. Then the door buzzed open. They climbed 2 flights of stairs, the steps creaking under their feet, past doors that leaked cooking smells and muffled television sounds. At the top landing, a door stood ajar, and an elderly man peered out, his face a map of wrinkles beneath a shock of white hair. You said you have Claire's things? Some of them, Margaret confirmed. Do you know where we can find her? The old man's face sagged. Claire's dead. Been almost 3 years now. Cancer. Margaret felt the words like a physical blow. She had been building a narrative in her head, one where they found Claire Dennison and she explained everything, provided answers that would make sense of the impossible. But dead was the end of stories, the place where explanations went to die. I'm sorry, she managed. Did you know her well? She lived across the hall for 10 years. Quiet girl, kept to herself mostly, except near the end, when the cancer was bad. I'd bring her groceries, drive her to appointments, didn't have family, far as I knew. What about friends? Anna Prowett? The old man's expression darkened. That name. Claire mentioned it sometimes, especially when she was on the heavy pain medication. Always asking if I'd seen Anna, if Anna had come back. I didn't know what she meant. Figured it was the drugs talking. Robert spoke up. Did Claire ever mention a doll? An antique porcelain doll? The old man's eyes widened. You found it? The one from the storage unit? You knew about it? Claire talked about it before she got real sick. Said it was the reason for everything, all her problems. Wanted to tell someone the truth before she died. But who'd believe her? Said there were things inside that doll that shouldn't be inside anything. People, she said. Trapped people. Margaret's hands tightened on the towel-wrapped bundle in her arms. Did she say who? Her old roommate was one of them. Anna something. And others. Claire said every time the doll got passed along, every time a new person took it home, someone went missing. A child here, a mother there. Little pieces of people getting pulled inside until there was nothing left but empty bodies walking around. That's impossible, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. The old man shrugged. Don't matter what's possible. Claire believed it. She was terrified of that doll, but too scared to destroy it. Said she could hear them sometimes, the voices inside it, whispering her name, begging her to set them free. How? Margaret asked. How did she think they could be freed? She never figured it out. That was the tragedy of it. She spent years researching, trying to understand what the doll was and where it came from. Had notebooks full of theories and dead ends. I helped her pack everything up when she couldn't afford this place anymore. Took it all to that storage unit. She said maybe it was better that way, letting it get lost in some warehouse, safer for everyone. Margaret unwrapped the doll, holding it up so the old man could see. His face went pale, and he took an involuntary step backward. "That's it," he whispered. "That's the thing from her nightmares." "Before Claire died," Margaret said urgently, "did she tell you anything else about the doll? Anything about how it works or why it takes people?" The old man thought for a moment, his eyes never leaving the doll's face. "She said something strange. Said the doll was looking for someone. Had been for a long time. That all the people it took, they weren't the right ones. It was searching for a specific person, and until it found them, it would keep taking and taking." "Who?" Robert asked. "Who was it looking for?" "She didn't know. Or if she did, she never told me." They thanked the old man and returned to their car, the weight of what they'd learned settling over them like a funeral shroud. Margaret stared at the doll in her lap, its cracked face seeming to mock their confusion. "We should take it to the police," Robert said. "Tell them about Anna Pruitt, about Claire's claims." "And say what? That a doll is abducting people? They'd think we're insane." "Then what's your plan?" Margaret didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about Lily, about the day her daughter had stopped playing with the doll, claiming it frightened her. Lily had been 8 years old enough to understand when something was wrong, when a toy stopped being a toy and became something else. "Lily knew," Margaret said softly. "She knew there was something wrong with Annabelle. That's why she stopped playing with it." "We donated it right after," Robert remembered, "to Goodwill." "Where Anna Pruitt probably found it," Margaret continued, "and then it consumed her, or trapped her, or whatever you want to call it. And eventually, it ended up in Claire's possession, where it stayed locked in storage for years. Until we bought the unit. Until it called to us," Margaret corrected. "It said Lily's name, Robert. Of all the people who could have bought that unit, it was the parents of a girl who'd owned it decades ago. That's not coincidence." Robert wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because Margaret was right. The odds of them randomly purchasing the storage unit that contained a doll their daughter had once owned, a doll that had supposedly been consuming people for years, were astronomical. Either this was the greatest coincidence in history, or something else was at play, something that defied rational explanation. "What do you think it wants?" he asked. Margaret looked down at the doll, and for a moment she could swear its eyes shifted, focusing directly on her face. "I think," she said slowly, "it wants us to finish what Claire started. It wants us to set them free. How? I don't know, but we need to find Claire's research. The old man said she had notebooks full of theories. It would be in the storage unit. We only took a few boxes." They drove back to Pinecrest Storage, using the key the auction company had provided. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the facility's endless rows of identical units. Their footsteps echoed as they walked back to Unit 247, and Margaret felt eyes watching them, though the corridors were empty. Robert unlocked the unit and pulled up the rolling door. The space seemed different in the failing light, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The boxes they'd already searched stood in disarray, but dozens more remained untouched. They worked quickly, methodically, opening every box and examining its contents. Margaret found the notebooks in a plastic bin labeled Research, tucked beneath a layer of old blankets. There were 7 of them, each filled with Claire Dennison's precise handwriting. Margaret sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and began to read while Robert continued searching. Claire's research was extensive and disturbing. She'd traced the doll's history back as far as she could, finding references to it in police reports and missing persons cases spanning decades. A child in 1987 who'd vanished from her bedroom, her mother claiming she'd gone into her favorite toy. A college student in 1993 who'd disappeared after buying an antique doll at an estate sale. An elderly woman in 1978 who'd been found catatonic, clutching a porcelain doll and whispering names. The pattern was clear. The doll moved from owner to owner, always through second-hand channels. Thrift stores, estate sales, auctions. And wherever it went, people vanished. Not physically, their bodies remained, but something essential was taken. They became hollow, empty, as if their souls had been scooped out. Claire had theories about what the doll was. One notebook was devoted to folklore about cursed objects and soul vessels. Another explored quantum physics and the possibility of consciousness existing in multiple states. A third detailed interviews Claire had conducted with families of the missing, people who'd lost loved ones to the doll's hunger. But it was the last notebook that made Margaret's blood run cold. The final entries, written in increasingly shaky handwriting as Claire's illness progressed, contained a possible solution. The doll is a door, but doors swing both ways. If I could find the right person, someone who already has a connection to it, someone it's tried to take before and failed, they might be able to go inside and bring the others back. But it would be dangerous. The doll doesn't like being forced to give up what it's taken. It might try to keep them all, including whoever goes in to save them. The next entry was dated just 2 weeks before Claire's death. I failed. I tried to go inside myself to save Anna, but I wasn't the right person. The doll rejected me, pushed me out. I think it's because I came to it as an adult. The others, they were all children when they first encountered it, when it first marked them. The doll takes children because they're malleable, their souls still forming. But the one it's looking for, the one who can open the door from both sides, has to be someone who touched it as a child but escaped, someone who knows its nature but wasn't consumed. Margaret's hands shook as she read the final entry. I wish I could find them, the child who got away, because they're the key to everything. They're the only one who can end this. Margaret looked up to find Robert reading over her shoulder, his face grim. Lily, he said. She touched it as a child. It marked her, but she escaped somehow. She stopped playing with it because she sensed what it was, Margaret agreed. She was strong enough to pull away. But Lily is, Robert couldn't finish the sentence, dead. Their daughter was dead, killed in a senseless accident 3 months ago. Whatever key she might have represented, it died with her. Margaret stood, her legs stiff from sitting on cold concrete. She walked to where the doll lay propped against a box, its cracked face seeming to watch her approach. She picked it up, cradling it as she might have cradled Lily as an infant, and something shifted inside her chest. A recognition, an understanding that came from some place beyond logic. She's in here, Margaret whispered. Lily is inside the doll. Robert made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Maggie, that's not possible. We buried Lily. We said goodbye. We buried her body, but what if her soul, her essence, whatever you want to call it, what if it didn't move on? What if, when she died, the connection she had to this doll pulled her inside? You're grasping at straws. This is grief talking. Then explain why the doll said her name. Margaret's voice rose, echoing in the metal unit. Explain why, of all the people in this town, we're the ones who bought this unit. Explain why Claire Dennison wrote about finding someone who touched the doll as a child and escaped. Robert had no explanations. He was a man who'd built his life on numbers and certainty, on ledgers that always balanced, and problems that had solutions. This was beyond his comprehension, beyond the ordered universe he understood. Margaret pressed the doll to her chest, feeling its hardness against her heart. I'm going in, she said. Going in? What does that even mean? Claire wrote that the right person could use the doll as a door, could go inside and bring the others back. I think I'm the right person. I'm Lily's mother. If she's in there, she'll know me, she'll trust me. This is insanity, Robert protested. You read some disturbed woman's notebooks, and now you think you can jump into a doll like it's a portal to another dimension? Do you have a better explanation for what's happening? Robert didn't. He wanted to grab his wife, take her home, maybe call their family doctor, and explain that grief was making her delusional. But he'd seen too much today, heard too much. The doll had spoken their daughter's name. Claire Dennison's research was too detailed, too extensive to dismiss as mere delusion. And somewhere deep in his rational mind, in a place he'd never acknowledged before, Robert knew that the world was stranger than he'd ever allowed himself to believe. "How?" he asked, and heard his own defeat in the word. Margaret stared into the doll's glass eyes, seeing her own reflection distorted in their depths. Claire wrote that you have to want to go inside. You have to open yourself to it, invite it in. The doll takes people who resist, but maybe it can also accept people who offer themselves willingly. And if you go in and can't get out, if it traps you like it trapped the others, then you'll have the notebooks. You'll have Claire's research. Maybe you can find another way. "I can't lose you too," Robert said, his voice breaking. "I can't bury another person I love." Margaret set the doll down and went to her husband, taking his weathered hands in hers. They'd been married 35 years, had weathered infertility and financial struggles and the thousand small disasters that make up a life. But nothing had prepared them for losing their daughter. Nothing had prepared them for this moment, standing in a storage unit, contemplating the impossible. "If Lily is in there," Margaret said gently, "then I never lost her. And if I can bring her back, bring all of them back, then maybe some good can come from our grief." Robert pulled his wife into an embrace, holding her as if he could physically prevent what was about to happen. But he knew Margaret, knew that once she set her mind to something, the universe would bend to accommodate her will. He could only pray the universe was kind. They separated, and Margaret picked up the doll once more. She sat on the floor of the storage unit, her back against a stack of boxes, the doll in her lap. Robert sat beside her, holding her free hand. "If you get in trouble," he said, "I'll find a way to bring you back. I promise." Margaret squeezed his hand, then closed her eyes. She thought about Lily as a child, laughing in the sunlight. Lily as a teenager, rolling her eyes at her parents' outdated music choices. Lily as an adult, calling every Sunday evening to check in, to share the small details of her life. She thought about love, about the connection between mother and child that transcended physics and biology, that made a mockery of death itself. And then she opened herself to the doll. At first, nothing happened. Margaret sat in the dim storage unit, feeling foolish, aware of Robert's eyes on her. But then she felt it, a pull, like a riptide dragging her down. The world began to dissolve around her, the concrete walls melting into shadows, the overhead light dimming to a pinpoint. She heard Robert call her name, felt his hand tighten on hers, but his voice was already distant, echoing as if from the far end of a tunnel. The last thing she saw was the doll's face, those glass eyes suddenly alive, burning with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry. Then Margaret fell into darkness. She was nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, suspended in a void that defied description. Not dark, not light, but something between and beyond both. She tried to move and found she had no body, or perhaps she was all body. Her consciousness expanded to fill an infinite space. Then, gradually, forms began to emerge from the void. Faces floating like ghosts, their features indistinct, but their eyes clear. She saw a young woman with sharp cheekbones. Anna Prowett, she realized. Saw a child, no more than 7, clutching a teddy bear. Saw a teenager, a middle-aged man, an elderly woman. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all trapped in this in-between place. And then she saw Lily. Her daughter stood, or floated, distance and direction having no meaning here, a few feet away. She looked as she had the last time Margaret saw her alive, wearing jeans and a green sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face bright with life. "Mom?" Lily's voice was uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Baby, I'm here. I found you." Lily's face crumbled, and she moved forward, or Margaret moved, or the space between them simply ceased to exist. And then they were holding each other, and Margaret could feel her daughter's warmth, smell her lavender perfume, and the grief that had been crushing her chest for 3 months finally began to lift. "I don't understand," Lily sobbed. "I died. The accident. There was so much blood. And then I was here. I've been here for so long, and I didn't know why." "The doll," Margaret explained. "You touched it when you were a child. It marked you somehow, and when you died, it pulled you here instead of letting you move on." "There are others," Lily said, pulling back and gesturing to the floating faces. "They're all trapped. Some of them have been here for decades. They're fading, Mom, getting weaker. Eventually, they'll disappear completely, and then they'll really be gone." Margaret looked at the faces surrounding them, saw the desperation in their eyes. These were people who'd been stolen from their lives, imprisoned in a doll's hollow body by something that fed on souls. Anna Pruitt was here, and the child with the teddy bear, and all the others Claire Dennison had documented. Generations of the lost and stolen. "How do we get out?" Margaret asked. "I don't know. I've tried everything. We all have. But the doll won't let us go. It needs us, somehow. We are what gives it power." Margaret thought about Claire's research, her theories about the doll being a door that swung both ways. If she'd gotten in, there had to be a way out. But Claire had also written that the doll didn't like giving up what it had taken, that it would fight to keep its prisoners. As if summoned by her thoughts, Margaret felt a presence behind her. She turned, or thought about turning, and her perspective shifted, and found herself facing something that defied description. It had the doll's face, but larger, grotesque. Its porcelain features stretched over something too large to be contained. Its eyes were black holes, and its smile was full of teeth that shouldn't exist in a toy's mouth. "You don't belong here," the thing said without speaking, its thoughts pressing directly into Margaret's consciousness. "You came of your own will. You can leave, but the others stay. They're mine." "No," Margaret said, surprised to find her voice steady. "You're going to let them all go." "Why would I do that? They're what I am. Without them, I'm just porcelain and paint, just a thing. They give me purpose." "What are you?" Margaret asked. The thing that wore the doll's face seemed to consider the question. "I don't remember. I've been so many things. A totem, a vessel, a toy. I was created to hold souls, to keep them safe, for the journey to what comes after. But something broke, and I couldn't let go anymore. Every soul I held, I wanted to keep, and with each one, I grew stronger, more aware. Now I need them. Without them, I'll fade back to being just a doll, empty and forgotten." "These people have families," Margaret said. "People who love them, who miss them. You can't keep them. Their families have already grieved and moved on. What difference does it make if they're here or gone?" "It makes every difference," Margaret insisted, "because they're not gone. They're trapped. And that's not death, that's torture." The doll thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You came here to save your daughter. Take her and go. I'll allow that. But the others stay." Margaret felt Lily's hand tighten on hers, felt her daughter's fear and desperation bleeding through their connection. She could leave. She could take Lily and return to the real world, to Robert, to some semblance of the life they'd had before. But Margaret was a nurse. She'd spent 30 years caring for the sick and dying, holding hands and easing pain. She'd taken an oath to do no harm, and leaving these souls imprisoned while she escaped with her daughter would be the greatest harm she could imagine. "No," she said, "either we all leave or none of us do." "Then you'll stay forever," the dull thing hissed. "You and your daughter and all the rest. More food for what I've become." Margaret felt the void closing in, felt the presence of the doll thing growing larger, darker, more suffocating. She thought of Robert, waiting in the storage unit, probably terrified out of his mind. She thought of Claire Dennison, who'd spent years trying to solve this puzzle and failed. She thought of all the families who'd lost someone to this creature, who'd spent years searching for answers that would never come. And then she thought about something Claire had written in her notebook, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. The doll doesn't like being forced to give up what it's taken. It might try to keep them all, including whoever goes in to save them. The doll wanted to keep them, needed to keep them, which meant it was afraid of losing them, which meant there was something that could make it let go. "You're afraid," Margaret said. The doll thing recoiled. "I fear nothing. I am eternal." "You're afraid of being empty again, of being just a thing with no purpose. That's why you keep taking souls, why you can't let go. You're afraid that without them, you'll stop existing." Silence! The void shook, and Margaret felt her consciousness being compressed, the doll thing trying to force her into a smaller and smaller space. But she held on to Lily, refused to let go, and she called out to the other souls floating in the darkness. "Help me!" she shouted. "All of you, if we work together, we can escape." For a moment, nothing happened. Then Anna Pruitt's face came closer, her eyes focusing on Margaret with something like hope. The child with the teddy bear followed, and then the teenager, the elderly woman, the middle-aged man. One by one, the trapped souls moved toward Margaret and Lily, forming a chain of consciousness, a network of stolen lives refusing to stay stolen any longer. The doll thing screamed, a sound that wasn't sound, but pure rage and fear translated into experience. It tried to tear them apart, to break the connections forming between the souls, but Margaret held on. She thought about every patient she'd ever cared for, every hand she'd held as someone passed from life to death. She thought about the strength of the human spirit, its refusal to be diminished or destroyed. And she thought about love, the love of a mother for her daughter, yes, but also the love of all the people waiting in the real world for these souls to come home. The love of Claire Dennison, who'd spent her last years trying to make this right. The love of Robert, who even now was probably holding her body in the storage unit, begging her to wake up. The chain of souls began to glow, a light that had no source but somehow illuminated the void. Margaret felt power flowing through them, not from any one person, but from their collective will to survive, to escape, to live. "Let us go," Margaret commanded, and her voice was echoed by dozens of others. "Let us go." The doll thing thrashed and shrieked, trying to maintain its hold, but the light was growing too bright. Margaret felt herself being pulled upward, or outward, or forward, directions still meaningless here. And she pulled Lily with her, pulled all of them, the entire chain of stolen souls. The void cracked like breaking porcelain. Light flooded in, real light, beautiful and painful. Margaret felt herself being compressed back into a body, felt the weight of flesh and bone reasserting itself. She heard sounds, Robert's voice sobbing her name, and felt his arms around her, felt the cold concrete floor of the storage unit beneath her. She opened her eyes. Robert's face swam into focus, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You were gone," he choked out. "You weren't breathing. I thought—" Margaret sat up, Robert helping her, his hands shaking. The doll lay a few feet away, and as Margaret watched, cracks spread across its surface like a spider web. Its porcelain face split down the middle, its glass eyes went dark, and then it simply crumbled into dust and fragments. "Did it work?" Robert asked. "Did you find her?" Margaret looked around the storage unit, searching for Lily, for any sign that she'd escaped the void. But the unit was empty except for her and Robert and the remains of the destroyed doll. I don't know," Margaret whispered. "I thought I was sure." Then she heard it, a voice from outside the unit, calling. "Mom? Dad?" They both froze. That voice. They knew that voice better than their own heartbeats, knew every inflection and tone, had heard it every day for 32 years, until 3 months ago when it was silenced forever. Margaret stumbled to her feet, Robert beside her, both of them moving toward the open door of the storage unit. They stepped out into the corridor, and there, standing beneath a fluorescent light, solid and real and alive, was Lily. She looked confused, disoriented, as if she'd just woken from a long sleep. Her clothes were the same ones she'd been wearing in the void, jeans and a green sweater, but they were real now, made of actual fabric instead of memory and light. "I don't understand," Lily said. "I was in the car. There was an accident. And then I was somewhere else, somewhere dark. And you were there, Mom. And then—" She looked around the storage facility at the endless rows of units. "Where am I? How did I get here?" Margaret crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her daughter into an embrace, holding her so tight she feared Lily's ribs might crack. But Lily was solid, warm, breathing, real. Robert joined them, his arms encircling both his wife and daughter, and they stood in the corridor of Pinecrest Storage, crying and laughing and not caring who might see or hear. "You're alive," Margaret kept saying. "You're alive! You're alive! You're alive!" "What happened?" Lily asked, pulling back to look at her parents' faces. "The last thing I remember clearly is the accident. Everything after that is like a dream. Was I in a coma?" Margaret and Robert exchanged glances, an entire conversation passing between them in that look. "How did you explain to your daughter that she'd been dead for 3 months, that her soul had been trapped inside a cursed doll, that her mother had ventured into a void beyond human comprehension to rescue her?" "It's a long story," Robert said finally. "Let's go home. We'll explain everything there." They walked toward the exit, Lily between her parents, still disoriented but accepting their presence with the easy trust of a child. Margaret looked back once at Unit 247, at the remains of the doll scattered across its floor, and wondered about the others. Had they escaped too? Were souls reappearing in their homes right now, confusing their families, requiring explanations that would never be believed? She hoped so. She prayed so. As they reached the parking lot, Margaret noticed something that made her stop. Other people were emerging from various parts of the storage facility, all looking confused and disoriented. A young woman with sharp cheekbones, Anna Pruitt, Margaret realized with a jolt. A child clutching a teddy bear, a middle-aged man, an elderly woman, all the souls who'd been trapped in the doll, all returned to physical form. They locked eyes across the parking lot, these strangers bound by a shared experience that none of them fully understood. Anna Pruitt smiled, a broken, grateful expression, and raised her hand in a small wave. Margaret waved back, tears streaming down her face. Then Anna turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. The others dispersed in different directions, all heading toward whatever lives they'd been stolen from, all granted an impossible second chance. Margaret, Robert, and Lily got into their car. Robert started the engine, but before he could put it in gear, Lily spoke. "I remember more now," she said softly. "I was trapped somewhere. with others. We were part of something that kept us from moving on. And then you came, Mom. You broke us free." "You remember?" Margaret asked. "Not all of it, just fragments, like a dream that fades when you wake up." Lily reached forward from the back seat and squeezed her mother's shoulder. "But I remember you. You didn't give up on me." Margaret covered Lily's hand with her own. "Never. I never will." They drove home through the darkening streets of Millbrook, past familiar landmarks that seemed strange and new after the day's impossible events. When they pulled into their driveway, the house that had seemed so empty and haunted for 3 months now blazed with welcome. Robert's hand shook as he unlocked the front door, and they entered together, a family restored. That night, they sat in the living room, the 3 of them, crowded onto a couch meant for 2, and Margaret and Robert tried to explain what had happened. They told Lily about the storage unit auction, about the doll, about Claire Dennison's research and the souls trapped inside. They showed her the notebooks, the newspaper clipping about Anna Pruitt, the evidence of something impossible that had nevertheless been true. Lily listened quietly, her face growing more troubled as the story unfolded. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The doll," she said finally. "I remember it from when I was little. It scared me. I felt like it wanted something from me, but I didn't know what." "It wanted your soul," Margaret said gently, "but you were strong enough to resist it."
"You stopped playing with it, and we gave it away. And then I died, and it finally got me." Lily's voice was hollow. "Mom, what if this isn't real? What if I'm still in that void, and this is just a dream?" Robert took his daughter's hand. "You're real. You're here. We can feel you, see you. Whatever happened, you're back now. That's all that matters." But Margaret understood Lily's fear because she felt it too. The world had revealed itself to be stranger and more terrible than they'd ever imagined. If dolls could steal souls and voids could exist between life and death, what else was possible? What other horrors lurked in attics and basements and storage units, waiting to be discovered? Over the following days, they tried to return to normal life, or something approximating it. Lily moved back into her old bedroom, the one that still smelled of lavender perfume. They called the police to report her reappearance, spinning a story about amnesia and wandering that no one quite believed but couldn't disprove. Lily's friends and coworkers welcomed her back with joy and confusion, accepting the impossible because the alternative, that she'd been dead and was somehow now alive, was too much to accept. Margaret returned to Pinecrest Storage one last time, wanting to see if anything remained of the doll. The auction company had already cleared Unit 247, selling off Claire Dennison's belongings to various buyers. Where the doll had crumbled to dust, there was nothing now but clean concrete. She found the old man who'd known Claire, the neighbor from 317 Maple Street. He was standing in the parking lot, staring at nothing, his face slack with wonder. "She came back," he told Margaret. "Anna Pruitt just appeared at my door 3 days ago, looking exactly like she did 27 years ago when she disappeared. Said she didn't remember where she'd been or what happened. It's a miracle." "Yes," Margaret agreed, "it is." "Others too," the old man continued. "People all over town, appearing out of nowhere, missing persons from years back suddenly found. Police don't know what to make of it. News is calling it the Millbrook Mystery." Margaret imagined reporters trying to piece together the story, finding connections between the disappeared and returned, all of them linked by a cursed doll that no longer existed. But physical evidence was dust, and the void had left no traces. The story would remain a mystery, one more in a world full of things that couldn't be explained. She left the storage facility and drove to the cemetery where they'd buried Lily's empty body 3 months ago. The grave was still there,
the headstone still bearing her daughter's name and dates. But the body beneath the earth, if it had ever really been there, was gone. They'd have to arrange an exhumation, another impossible conversation with authorities, another lie to explain the inexplicable. But Margaret found she didn't care. Lily was alive. All the souls were free. And the doll, that terrible ancient thing that had consumed so many lives, was destroyed. Months passed. The Millbrook mystery faded from the news cycle as reporters moved on to other stories. Anna Prewitt started a new life, finding work at a bookstore and slowly rebuilding herself. The other returned souls did the same, creating lives from scratch, learning to live in a world that had moved on without them. Margaret and Robert adjusted to having their daughter back. Some days it felt like a dream, impossible and fragile. Other days it felt completely natural, as if Lily had never been gone. They learned not to question it too closely, to accept the gift they'd been given. Lily struggled the most. She remembered fragments of her time in the void, dreams that woke her screaming. She saw a therapist who diagnosed PTSD without knowing what the trauma had been. Slowly, carefully, she began to heal. One evening, 6 months after her return, Lily found her mother in the kitchen preparing dinner. Margaret was chopping vegetables, lost in thought, when she felt arms wrap around her from behind. "Thank you," Lily whispered, "for not giving up on me, for finding a way to bring me back." Margaret set down the knife and turned, embracing her daughter. "You're my child. I'd go to the ends of the earth for you. Even farther, apparently." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other as the sun set outside the window, painting the walls gold and crimson. And in that moment, Margaret understood that this was the real gift. Not the impossible rescue, not the victory over a cursed object, but this simple present moment. Her daughter alive, her family whole, the future stretching before them like an open road. Later that night, Robert found Margaret in Lily's old bedroom, which was now Lily's bedroom again. She was standing by the window, looking out at the stars. "Thinking about the doll?" Robert asked. "Wondering if we did the right thing," Margaret admitted. "What if there are others? What if destroying that doll didn't end it? What if there are more cursed objects out there, trapping souls?" Robert came to stand beside her. "Then someone else will have to stop them. We did what we could. We saved who we could. That has to be enough." "Does it bother you," Margaret asked, "that we'll never be able to explain what happened? That we have to lie about everything?" "Yes," Robert said honestly. "But I'm learning to live with uncertainty. The world is stranger than I thought, more dangerous, but also more wonderful. We got our daughter back, Maggie. We witnessed an impossible thing and survived it. That's more than most people can say." They stood together in silence, watching the stars, each processing in their own way the extraordinary events that had brought them to this moment. Somewhere in Millbrook, other families were doing the same, welcoming back loved ones who'd been lost, trying to make sense of miracles. And in attics and basements and storage units across the country, other objects waited. Boxes and bags and forgotten toys, some harmless, some holding secrets that would destroy anyone who opened them. But tonight, Margaret didn't think about those. She thought about Lily, sleeping safely in her room down the hall. She thought about love, which was stronger than death, stronger than curses, strong enough to break through voids and rescue the lost. She thought of second chances. A year after Lily's return, Margaret stood in the same spot where she'd first heard the dolls speak her daughter's name. The storage facility had changed ownership, been renamed and repainted. Unit 247 now held a young couple's furniture, no trace remaining of what had happened there. But Margaret remembered. She would always remember the day she'd bought a storage unit and found the impossible inside. The day she'd lost everything and gained it back. The day she'd learned that the world was deeper and stranger than she'd ever imagined. She placed her hand against the metal door of the unit, feeling its warmth from the afternoon sun. Behind her, Robert and Lily waited in the car. They'd come here together, all three of them, because they'd needed to see it one last time. Margaret closed her eyes and thought about Claire Dennison, who'd spent years trying to solve a mystery she couldn't share. She thought about Anna Pruitt and all the other souls who'd been trapped for so long. She thought about the child she'd been, the woman she'd become, the mother she would always be. Then she turned and walked back to her family. They drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past houses where ordinary people lived ordinary lives, not knowing how thin the veil was between the everyday and the impossible. But Margaret knew. She would carry that knowledge for the rest of her life, a secret gift wrapped in horror, a mystery that had cost her everything and given it all back again. They pulled into their driveway as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The three of them walked into their home together, and Margaret closed the door on the world outside. Inside, dinner waited to be made, conversation waited to be had, life waited to be lived, precious and impossible and real. And somewhere in the house, barely audible, a sound like wind chimes or distant laughter echoed through the halls. Margaret paused, listening, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Just a family, together again. Just a life restored. Just an ordinary evening in an ordinary home, where miracles had happened and might happen again. The end.